Thank you for this opportunity, FADA. It's a pleasure to be here. A couple of minutes ago, my earlier speaker also mentioned that how large the opportunity is in Gujarat. Almost about 400,000 vehicles being sold per month. Of course, dominated by two-wheelers, but other categories are also really quite big. When we look at a state like Gujarat. Now, what I'll try to cover in the next 45 minutes or so is that I'll give you a sense of how the overall dealership landscape is changing and how agile we need to be as dealers. And with the changing dynamics, how will the business models of dealerships change? And today, service spares, which is a major share of our revenue and more than revenue margins, how is that going to change, kind of going forward? So from that perspective, if you ask me, I'll kind of throw some light on that, and we'll keep this session quite engaging. In case if there are any questions, please feel free to ask while I'm presenting, and I'll be very happy to respond at that point of time. Can we move forward? Yeah. So as I said, if you actually see what is going to be the biggest challenge for automotive dealerships, in the years to come, is to remain financially viable and profitable, over the year. What is changing if you actually see? If you see, there is a pressure from OEMs that, the reach has to be increased significantly as compared to what it is today. So there is, a push that you need to increase your network size. And OEMs are constantly, kind of increasing their network in India on the go. Next. If you see in the last couple of years, people have been speaking about electric vehicles, but what is also very important is the softwareization of vehicles has gone up significantly. And there are a lot of sensors, a lot of electronics and electricals that are present in the vehicle as compared to what they were there earlier. So, apart from mechanical parts, there are a lot of electrical and electronic parts wherein you need some specialized skills, in order to diagnose and then, kind of come up with solutions for the same. Also, what you see is, third thing which is very, very important is, customers are demanding a very superior experience. Today, they would want their dealership to feel like an airport lounge, where they'll get all the kind of facilities. And, a dealership is also not merely a place which is only to sell vehicles. So the customer is actually coming in for an experience rather than, just buying a vehicle, because most of the times, because of the level of digitization that has happened, a customer has largely made up his mind as to what he wants to purchase. And then he comes to the showroom, he'll see the kind of experience he gets, and maybe do a couple of test drives, and then maybe finalize the vehicle. Yeah, and the most important part is, especially when you look at dealerships which are in metros or tier 1 cities, the rental costs or the real estate costs are killing, and that is one of the reasons that, we'll have to move to a business model which is sustainable over the mid to long term. Yeah, we can just click 4 times. So if you actually see, what is it that I'm going to cover today? One is, I'm trying to give a flavor of how the financials of dealerships look like in each region in India. We've divided it into north, east, west, south and central. Gujarat will form a part of the western zone. What is going to be the impact of EVs and softwareization on dealership operations? How do we see the dealership operations change with EVs and softwareization happening? In the last couple of years, we've also tried to put in some numbers as to, with increasing in the network or with increasing touch points, what is the kind of pressure that is evident on dealerships? Basically, if you see the number of units sold per dealership is actually coming down over a period of time because of increase in network, which means more and more capital or fixed cost being invested, and you have lesser number of vehicles to spread it over to, if I have to say it in a very, very simple language. So from that perspective, how the dynamics are changing. And then, a few strategies to achieve financial prudence and enhance customer experiences compared to what we are doing today. I'm sure many of the dealerships would be following a lot of steps that, I would have proposed in the presentation as we move forward. But it will be good to hear a few examples if a few of you are keen to share the same. If you actually see the first part that I'm covering is if you look at return on capital employed for dealerships across India, and this is, basis the official financials that are filed by most of the dealerships in India. I'm sure all of you know how colored the picture could be, but in a way what we are trying to say is, if you look at the relative difference, you will still be able to understand that two-wheelers make the best return on capital employed, followed by passenger vehicles, then commercial vehicles, and then there are certain conglomerate dealerships which have more than one brand, dealerships, which tend to make relatively better returns, depending on the brands that they own and the dealership that they have.
Just a question, like in this capital employed, have we considered the historic cost of the capital invested or the notional value of the, in case if dealership is having any property,
right,
the notional value of that property, because the old dealership they have invested capital before 5, 10, 15 years.
Right. Sir.
So my question is like it should not be the historic cost of the capital invested, but it has to be the actual real-time cost of that property or even capital invested.
Agree. It will not be the nominal price of the property, as you rightly said, which exists today. It will be the price at which you purchase that property if you have that property. So when you say return on capital employed, it is actually the money that you have actually invested in business till date. And on that, what is the kind of return that you are making? So the actual profitability that you are making out of it. That is what gets registered here. It does not take into consideration the price that exists today, because you would have invested maybe a couple of years ago and at a particular rate, which still sits in your balance sheet.
Yeah, that's true. But we should consider the opportunity cost of also.
If you ask me, many dealerships are today operating on rent. So for them, what is the real cost is something which will get covered in their P&L, the form of rent outgo that are there. There are relatively lesser number of dealerships today which will have a lot of fixed assets on their own name, especially all of them. They will definitely have their, erstwhile showrooms which they would have started, which will be, in their own land and premises. But apart from that, we are seeing that slowly, gradually, we are moving towards more rental as compared to, more ownership. Also, what we've tried to do is, we've tried to give a flavor of how it differs region-wise. So if you actually see across regions, west and north, largely have been in sync with respect to the numbers, and even south for that matter. East is a little iffy in certain cases, but what is very, very important to see is if you actually look at East in, say, two-wheelers or even in CVs, the ROC is phenomenally better as compared to, many other parts of the country that we are that we are looking at. And which is quite counterintuitive to what one would actually think. People typically think that in the eastern part of the country there are not many opportunities, or maybe the relative opportunities are less when we compare to north, west, and south, and hence they would be making lesser returns. But it is counterintuitive that they make better returns as compared to the other parts of the country.
Excuse me, I have one question.
Yeah.
Your return on capital in employment, did you consider the interest cost of the capital?
Did you consider the?
When you working this on return on capital employment,
Yes.
did you consider the interest cost of the capital?
Yeah, it is basically earnings before interest and tax. It is not after interest. Yes. Yeah. So if you consider interest cost, this will fall further. I will in fact cover it if you look at the PBDIT upon interest charges. So what is the amount of profit that the dealership is making, and basis that what is the interest charges it is paying. So if you see in case of two-wheelers, it is in the range of about 2 to 4 times the interest charge, that is the profitability. In case of passenger vehicles, in east and south it is much better, it is almost 7 to 9 times. But when you look at north and central as well as west, it is only 2 to 3 times. On the other hand, if you look at CVs, it's abysmally low, in the range of about 1 to 1.5 times. And when you look at conglomerates, wherein you will have a apt mix of passenger vehicles most of the times, and some other dealerships that you will be having, there it is in the range of about 2 to 2.5. Similarly, what we also try to see is the kind of investment that you are putting in. Or if I have to say that, I'm going to not look at ROA, but what is the income that you are generating basis the investment that you made. So what is the operating income on gross block? So that also gives you a sense as to, what is going to be your asset turnover ratio, if I have to say so. That basis the kind of investments you are making, what is the turnover you are able to achieve. So if you actually see in the two-wheeler business, it's phenomenally high. But with the businesses like PVs as well as conglomerate, wherein PV will definitely be one of the dealerships that they would generally have, the investment expectation is quite high, especially in showroom and ancillary services. Because of which, if you look at the operating income to gross block ratio, there it is relatively lower. But when you look at the operating income to gross block ratio in two-wheelers, it is much higher. Now, what is also very important is, how the debt to equity ratio is, for dealerships. And if you look at the debt to equity across regions, again, you see that two-wheelers are relatively leaner, because the kind of investment that is required as compared to a PV or a CV dealership, one, that is low. And second, the asset value itself is, or the vehicle price itself is quite low. So from that perspective, you will see that the debt to equity ratio for two-wheelers is relatively lower, but as you keep moving up, for passenger vehicles it is like 12.12 times, for CVs it is like 18 times. So which is significant leverage that we are seeing in case of PVs and two-wheelers both. And then when we look at region-wise, if you look at say passenger vehicles, you will see that again north and central are the most leveraged with 16 times. Again west and south are relatively closer, about 9 to 11 times, and east at about 7 times. When you look at CVs, again north and south are at about 7 to 8 times, but when you look at east, central and west, it's like 30 times and above, which also means that the kind of leverage many of the dealerships are taking is actually going to put them into a lot of pressure going forward. If sales don't kind of remain at the levels at which they are today, or possibly in segments like CVs example, they go through a cycle every 3 to 4 years. So if you see a down cycle for a period of almost 18 months, there is a very high chance that you may get choked because of the kind of debt levels that most of the dealerships have. What we've also tried to see is, we've looked at debt to income and debt to income by regions. And what we've also seen is when we look at the passenger vehicle industry, they typically have the highest margins in terms of the operating margins in comparison to, CVs or even two-wheelers for that matter. One of the biggest reasons is, the margins that they make out of the OES sales or, kind of, I would say, spares and service. So that is the reason, that is going to be very high. But sooner or later, now over the next couple of years, if this is not managed well, this is going to come under a tremendous amount of stress. And that is the reason, financial prudence is going to be very, very critical for dealerships going forward. Some other metrics that we've tried to look at is, when you look at the overall liabilities, excluding, the reserves that, the dealership has, or excluding the money that it has invested in reserves, then you will see that as a comparison, as a percentage of net worth, they are like the outstanding liabilities are about 4 times for two-wheeler dealerships, about 3 times for PV dealerships, and similarly about 4.5 times for CV dealerships. And when you look at it by region, you will actually see north is the highest in case of two-wheelers. If you then look at PVs, central and north is the highest. If you look at CVs, it is north and west, which is the highest. And when you look at conglomerates, your east is the highest, for that matter. Now, this is also very, very important. When you look at, today we read a lot of, or I actually, kind of compliment Saharsh and the entire team for regularly, releasing the numbers on a monthly basis, which also gives a clear indication of how the retail momentum on ground is. And it gives you a sense of the kind of inventory levels that most of the dealerships are carrying. And that is something, which has led to a lot of problems in the last couple of years also, especially in the last 18 to 24 months. If you actually look at, the cash conversion cycle for a two-wheeler dealer, you will see that generally they own, on an average, if you annualize it, about 53 days of inventory. of which 19 is debtor days, 21 is creditor days. So the cash conversion cycle for a dealership is typically about 51 days for a two-wheeler dealer. If you look at it for a passenger vehicle dealer, it is 60 days. For a commercial vehicle dealer, it is 65 days. And then when you look at the current ratio, it is quite healthy for two-wheelers, PV, CV and conglomerate level at an overall level. And the gross current asset days is in the range of about 90 days. So that's not much of a challenge. But if you actually look at the cash conversion cycle, it's the leanest for two-wheelers and the most heaviest for commercial vehicles. Now moving to the next part, when we talk about how things are going to change. If you actually see the traditional dealerships, as I spoke about, currently, there is very large inventory that exists, across many dealerships, especially in the case of passenger vehicles these days. There is heavy focus on engine diagnostics at this point of time. There is a very strong source of servicing revenue, and there is a high footfall driven by test drives, which is also changing. Okay. Now, if you see, buyers have already started to research online first before coming to showroom, so that change has already happened. Second, if you look at EVs or softwares coming in, softwareization happening, there will be less maintenance and there will be more pressure on profits because your engine diagnostics will go down. But you will have to make investments in battery diagnostics, OTA updates, which means new tools to be bought, new skill sets to be kind of administered, people costs will go up, training costs will go up. So that is something that one will have to manage. And on the other hand, what we are also seeing is, because of digitization, we may also see limited and optimized inventory and more digital sales happening. Today, the level of digital sales is relatively much lower, sub 5%. But going forward, this may change. And what we are also seeing is my interaction with many dealerships also gives me a sense that dealerships are, kind of investing a lot in this space, wherein they are building AI-led models, wherein they are capturing or collecting data which is for their district, for their particular RTO across brands, trying to see where they are as compared to the other brands that are operating in the district, why certain other brand has done well or your brand has not done well, and what is it that the others are doing. So the level of competitive intelligence and the infusion of AI in it is something that has led to a lot of changes for a lot of dealerships which have relatively become more agile as compared to what they were earlier. What we are also seeing is, as I mentioned, with EVs coming in, what is going to happen? There's virtually no need for any kind of oil or filter related changes. Similarly, because of regenerative braking, you will also see that there will be fewer replacements for brake pads. So from that perspective, these are three main kind of revenue items and margin items for dealerships, especially on the PV side, which is going to take a hit with EVs coming in. Second, lower parts and lower labor margins. If you actually see, the OE parts of electric motor and battery, pardon me, it is not lower margin, but I would say they have lower turnover because the replacement frequency is relatively much lower. And for doing this, you will have to invest in training of employees who will require specialized skills to kind of make good these vehicles or identify what is the problem in this vehicles. So what is changing? How can dealerships sustain this changing environment? So first is redefine the service and revenue model. Now what do? Focus on accessories, OTA services, software updates because these are coming up. Work on more calibrations, and battery health checks. This is going to be extremely critical. This will be a newer source of revenue. Second, in case of EV, since the torque is better, till date, most of the OEMs or dealerships never used to focus on tires. Or they used to focus on alignment, but not on selling tires. But this is something, which may also, kind of catch up very soon going forward because the wear and tear that EV tires will have will be almost 30% higher as compared to what a normal ICE vehicle tires will have. So from that perspective, they'll wear out faster. And because of more number of sensors in the vehicle, they will also require frequent calibration, which could be a source of revenue. So it is better to start investing in this space, from a diagnostic perspective. Second, as I mentioned, human capital. People will have to be upskilled, battery analytics skill sets, software diagnostic training. This is something that will become like a basic skill set that every dealership employee will have to have, or the service technician will have to have going forward. Certain OEMs like Tata Motors have started mandating a few of them, and MG has also come up with EV Expert Portal, which offers digital training and certification for dealers and models. And this model can be scaled because it is largely digital in nature. What is also very important is, as I mentioned, there is a lot of investment many dealerships are making on the integration of AI tools along with their CRM and what is actually happening in the market. So actually looking at Vahan data. So what we've seen is dealerships are actually looking at the trend of their own kind of walk-ins to conversion at an overall cycle level. They are also looking at how that has changed over a period of time. And then they are also looking at Vahan data to then kind of manage as to how this ratio has changed and how the conversion has become over a period of time. They will also get a sense of how their competitors are doing, which will help them take a lot of steps proactively. And we've been helping a lot of them to kind of integrate this with their current systems to ensure that they talk to one another and they become more agile, they become more light in terms of inventory, more better in terms of inventory management, and helps them aid their profitability. This is what I was kind of talking about. If you actually see, this is financial year 20, and this is basis what has been officially reported by OEMs in their annual report. For a hero dealer, the touch points were 7,200, which are 8,000 plus at this point of time. And the sales per touch point has gone down from almost 1,000 to 681. If you actually look at Maruti Suzuki, from 476 to 348. Tata Motors 556 to 311. And Leyland and Honda data was not available, but it's at about 83 and 799. So you can actually see, if you look at the trend in the last 5 years, despite PV sales increasing, network has increased at a much faster pace. And there's a lot of push by OEM that, we need to be present in every nook and corner of the country. Because of which, if you actually look at the cost structures of, dealerships, it is actually hampering the profitability. Because as sir mentioned, the real estate costs are so high that today setting up a dealership is a very big challenge. And real estate cost, initially it was the case that it was very high only in metro cities. But now when we look at the spread of real estate costs even in tier 1 and tier 2 cities, it's relatively much higher. So from that perspective, if you see, there is a lot of pressure that is there on profitability. If you don't kind of enhance this network in a much smarter way. So how do you do it, or what is it that you need to do to kind of get this done? So vehicle retail is also kind of undergoing significant changes. So one, if you see, the customer is preferring more digital led kind of purchase journey as compared to what it was earlier. So they want KYC to be done online, like what they see in a bank. They are expecting the same from the dealership. It has to be completely paperless. They don't want to spend time in filling papers, filling certain forms, etc. Second, kind of if you see, as I said, the expectation is that the dealership will act as a sales lounge and not as a sales center. So basically, the entire experience that the customer expects from a dealership has undergone a significant change, and especially for dealerships on the passenger vehicle side, and even for premium two-wheelers for that matter. What we are also seeing is this trend was not so much prevalent in India, till date, or largely has been on the two-wheeler side, where we are looking at multi-brand, multi-utility formats, kind of coming up. And this is one trend which is there globally. The way or the pace at which the industry is moving, the pace of change is something which will, in a way, make this inevitable. You will actually see that there will be shared spaces between multiple brands. There will be multi-utility formats going forward to ensure that costs are kept in check and at the same time profitability is managed. And last but not the least, what we are also seeing is, we are seeing satellite touch points coming in. Now, what does that mean? You will have digital kiosks in some rural centers rather than, opening a full-blown dealership. You may have certain, I would say, experience centers in a few malls which are there in the city center, wherein, you kind of give the experience to the customer, and then you may have a sales outlet which may be relatively on the outskirts of the city, and from where delivery and test drive can happen. But for that, the customer need not go to that outlet. So from that perspective, if you see, there are different ways in which, this will have to be managed, and this is something that we've already started to see happening, and, we are seeing this slowly, gradually picking up. If you also see, there are certain brands who have started to have experience centers as a concept, and, then sales are largely happening online. So at some times, it feels that service kaun karega, or who will invest in spare parts, which is very, very important. But what is also happening is, at the same time, customers are also slowly, gradually have started to adopt to this. They are facing challenges, but in some way or the other, they are not able to appreciate, the proximity of dealership to their, residence areas. Also, what is very, very important is, if you see, as I said, there is a complete shift in mindset, from selling vehicles to selling experiences. That is something which needs to come in. You will have to see that technology adoption is better as compared to what you are doing now. A lot of digitization will have to happen. Finance, insurance will also have to be integrated with your dashboards to see that they are talking to one another. You know what is going to be your payout, what is going to be your receivable. So you are able to manage your finances very well as compared to what you are doing today. Because today, most of the dealerships, what I am seeing even now is, when I visited a few of them, the dealer principal will be sitting in his cabin and he'll have a small chitti in front of him, where there will be 5 banks written, number of days written, kisko kab paise dena hai. So I'm not saying that is right or wrong, but over a period of time, as you have the next gen coming into dealerships, they would want more formal ways of doing business, and at the same time, as businesses expand, you can't sit in every outlet, or you can't look at how operations are happening everywhere. So from that perspective, the more the level of digitization, it helps you monitor stuff better, and it helps you, kind of create processes to course correct as you move forward. Second is, infrastructure realignment. As I said, create compact experience studios in urban malls, satellite outlets or mobile vans for rural or urban areas. We are seeing a few two-wheeler OEMs doing this. And kind of create zones for battery or software updates. So you don't need to have larger dealerships, they can be constrained, in terms of size, or they can largely be only from a sales perspective. But these kind of things can happen at a relatively distant location or fewer zones, because this may not require a lot of space for that. Then you will have to optimize your cost structure, which means asset-light formats, shared spaces. If you actually speak to someone in Weaver, the kind of traction that they were seeing about 5 years ago and the traction that they are seeing today is mind-boggling. About 10 years ago, if you would have told someone that you will have to share your space with few other people, and you will only get that much space to work, people were quite iffy about it, and they were very resistant to this change. But if you see with these concepts coming in, kind of change is happening. And it is happening at a much faster pace than we would have anticipated. Second, also focus on digital walk-ins and virtual bookings. Today, what we've also seen is many dealerships. I'm not talking about, I don't want to grade them as grade A or tier 1 or large dealerships, but the ones, which are typically relatively smaller in terms of size. So what I'm saying is somewhere in the range of 100 to 250 crores. We've seen that they are still focusing largely only on walk-ins, or on references. Now that is something which is also detrimental to their business and which is killing their business. And hence, focus on digital walk-ins and virtual bookings is very, very critical, and we need to look at that space also. Last is, ease of financing. So today what we've also seen is, you heard the gentleman from AU saying that, if the financial profile of the person is fine, They are able to give UTR number in a couple of hours in the same day or in the next couple of hours. So that is how quick the customer's expectation has become. I am sure the customer has driven them to do this change, and that is something that you will see happening very, very kind of aggressively going forward. So it is good that if we are able to integrate these things as a part of the overall platform that we have at dealerships. What I've also seen is many dealerships are today, I would not say behaving is the wrong word, but I am saying that most of them are turning very rigid because they are saying कि अगर OEM ने बोला है ये CRM डालना है तो वो एक अलग कंपनी का है, कुछ और अलग कंपनी का है, इसको इंटीग्रेट करना is a very big hassle. So who will do it? But if you actually see, there are many specialists who have come in the market who help you in integrating this and creating a bouquet for you. Maybe the initial capital cost is high, but if you actually invest in those kind of platforms, it will actually help you monitor and digitize a lot of things, which will help you very, very well, from a futuristic perspective. Yeah. Now, what you try to do is, how to improve your profitability. We'll have to go back to basics. Many of us have not been following it or have not been following it the way in which it needs to be followed, in the right spirit. First is, look at sales and marketing efficiency, because the channels through which you are getting inquiries is changing significantly as compared to what it was earlier. Second, look at the service efficiency, and third is to look at the operational efficiency. Now, what do you mean by sales and marketing efficiency? Improve your sales funnel conversion. How to do that? I'll cover that in the subsequent slide. Improve your service retention. And then optimize your expenses, whether it is working capital or whether it is manpower. What you are also seeing is because of this, the first part that I spoke about was sales efficiency. Improve your sales funnel conversion. Now, what do you mean by that? Everybody follows this ETBR. This is a known, kind of analogy in the automobile dealership world. Inquiry, test drive, booking and retail. But what is very important is you need to understand that where this inquiry is coming from. Whether it's a walk-in, whether it's from the website, whether it is from the social media, whether it is through telephone, or whether it is through any events that you are hosting. Why? Because what is very important is each inquiry source may have a different conversion ratio. And certain inquiry sources may work very well in your area, certain may not. And hence you will have to make investments accordingly. Today, unfortunately, what we are seeing is most of the dealerships are looking at inquiry to conversion. They are looking at this entire sales funnel. But they are looking at it at an overall level. But they are not looking at the split as to what is it that is leading to higher conversion and why. So, no, is it, and then you will also come to know that whether you need to focus on a particular mode or not. So am I focusing on converting online website leads? You'll have to find out the answer for that. But today are we asking that question? Possibly not. Second, as I said, you'll have to look at this source wise conversion ratios. To inquiry to test drive, inquiry to booking, inquiry to retail and booking to retail. This is the second level of check that you need to keep. First is source wise, and how does that go into inquiry, and then inquiries to test drive, inquiries to booking, inquiry to retail, booking to retail. This will give you a sense of how the customer journey is and where is it that the conversion is slipping. Is it that the inquiry to test drive ratio is good, inquiry to booking ratio is also good, but then when it comes to retail you are seeing that slipping out. Now what is that leading to? The customer slip out at that stage. So you will only come to know when you break it and you kind of try to see as to where is it that the customer is actually slipping out and what is the reason for the customer to slip out of the overall customer journey during the purchase. Third, what is very, very important is today at the end of the day, the dealer sales executive is the one who is the representative of the dealership in front of the customer, and he is the one who is actually sealing the deal for you. So what is very, very important is, you need to look at the efficiency of that salesperson also. in the form of the number of test drives that he is given, how many follow-ups has he done, per inquiry that have come in. And, what are the lost sales? Many times what we've seen is, the first one gets measured, a few proactive dealerships also measure the second one, that is follow-ups per inquiry. But nobody does an assessment of lost sales. Most of the times the reason that is given is, दूसरा डिस्काउंट ज्यादा दे रहा था और उसके लिए गाड़ी उसका लिया, दोनों गाड़ी में कोई ज्यादा अंतर नहीं था और उसका गाड़ी बिक गया. And that is the reason that has been given in most of the cases, that it is discounts or it is the scheme that the other OEM has launched which has led to the sales being better as compared to what you are doing today. What we've also seen is, in many cases, the involvement of the DSE is not as high, or the experience that the customer gets from the DSE is not as good as what a neighboring dealership has given. And that has been one of the reasons why, at the last leg, sales have gone lost, despite, working so hard, right from inquiry all the way to test drive to booking, and then at the last leg, the customer walks out and he says, I will buy a competing vehicle. Yeah, this is something, which is quite generic, but I thought, it's worth putting in. For achieving marketing efficiency, you need to do the right kind of BTL activities. Again, the right display at the right place at the right time. Treat any inquiry with the same level of seriousness that you would treat a walk-in inquiry. What we've seen is, walk-in inquiry gets the most amount of seriousness as compared to others. So that is also something, which is very, very important. If you actually see, other point which is very important is, there is only one rule: follow up on time and share information. What we've seen is, many a times, I will not name the brand, but I have myself tried, if I try to call up a particular brand dealership in my locality and I ask them that, I need to buy a vehicle and I need a test drive. Out of these 7 or 8 passenger vehicle brands that are present in the market today, I stay in Mumbai, in Mulund. Okay, so what I have seen is, maybe there are 2 brands or 3 brands wherein you will receive, a call within either a couple of minutes or within an hour. But there are still about 5 brands where you actually don't receive calls for days. And maybe after 4 days, 5 days, if you are fortunate, you will receive a call, sir, आपने inquiry किया था, आपको गाड़ी लेना है, आपने interest दिखाया था. अरे भाई, तब तक तो मैं दूसरे की गाड़ी टेस्ट ड्राइव कर चुका, मुझे अच्छा लगा, मैंने डील फाइनल करके मैंने गाड़ी खरीद लिया. So what is happening is, the amount of energy that needs to be spent on follow-up, whether it is happening on time, whether callbacks are happening on time, is something, which is very, very important. And second, because of digitization, what is also very, very helpful is, all these, kind of inquiries get digitized and you have a database of these customers, with you. So today, even if, the customer would have bought the same brand vehicle from a different outlet, you can at least attract him from a service perspective at your place. And we've seen that happening, because the service experience in a particular dealer is much better as compared to some other dealership. So from that perspective, that is how, people are also looking at using digitization. Yeah, and again, if you see, in case of service efficiency, you have to improve your service retention, which means, whichever is your customer who has purchased a vehicle from your dealership, he needs to have a good experience, he needs to get calls from you to understand, that your vehicle is up for servicing. We are seeing a few brands doing it, but still not all brands doing it regularly. Second, what is also very important is, after the vehicle is serviced, you need to understand as to what is it that, has been the customer's experience. Is he satisfied with what the, kind of dealership has, done? If you see, most of the dealerships, at least in Mumbai, what I have seen, wherever I service my vehicle, after the service is done, someone will call you and they'll say, sir, आपको एक link मिलेगा, please 9 या 10 का rating दे देना, because, नहीं तो OEM हमें चिल्लाएगा. But to be very honest, is it really the kind of experience the customer gets? Or if you see in most of the cases, the dealership, when they deliver the vehicle, after the service has happened, there is a set of forms that are given to the customer for signing that the vehicle is delivered and the vehicle is actually given to the customer. In that forms, if you actually see someone like me who's from the automobile industry understands that, but not many would. There is a form which also has a form of ranking or scoring the dealership, wherein also you just sign without reading it and you give it to me. And then when it goes to the dealership at the back end, 10 is something which is ticked and given to the dealership, which means the dealership feels there is no problem. Now, how can this be addressed? A few dealerships in Mumbai have started to share links on the customer's mobile where the customer fills the kind of experience that he's got in terms of grading and gives it to the dealership. That is the real rating that the customer is given, and you know where to work or where to attack. Now that is something which is missing. It's manual in many of the cases, and which still continues in case of even large format dealers. Second is increase revenue per service, accessories, AMC, merchandise. This is something which I need not tell you. You guys are very good or proactive at it for that matter. Yeah, this is another thing, when you look at expenses, how to optimize your expenses. So as I said, you need to see where is it that you might get the maximum ROI in terms of marketing spends. You need to train your employees, you need to go digital, and you need to balance between discounts and incentives that are paid to your sales executive that should be actually linked to certain things. In many cases that has started happening now, but in the first 3 cases we are still seeing a lot of management not happening. The last but not the least, kind of working capital and manpower optimization. Now, what is very important is, if you do this digitization, of course, there have been cases where many a times you will not be in a position to control what the OEM does and, kind of push stocks to the dealership. So that is something which is going to be difficult to manage. But if you have certain trends with you, which you can showcase to the OEM and tell him that, this is the reason why I do not want, stocks to be given to me. I'm sure the discussion could be more data oriented as compared to today, which is relatively more subjective in nature. Second, you reduce your data days by ensuring timely receipt of payment and clarify the payment terms. And if you look at manpower optimization, what is also very important is today we've seen that a dealership can have many of their employees, which are off-roll in a way. But despite that, we've seen is, there is a very unhealthy mix of on-roll versus off-roll employees. Now, for example, in many dealerships, we've seen there are people specifically designated, not one but two but many, for doing RTO work. There are people designated for security. Now, all this is something that can be given to off-roll employees rather than having these people on-roll. But either it's the way in which the leadership has been working for the last couple of years that this is continuing, or some reason because of which they are not willing to change this. And that is something which is hitting their dealership very high. Just to give you an example, what we witnessed is, if you look at the overheads that get added because of every headcount that you have, it's in the range of 2 to 3.5x of what happens in case of an on-roll versus off-roll employee. So, to give you an example, if an on-roll employee cost is 200, the off-roll employee cost is typically about 50 to 75 rupees. The same employee who is on-roll at 50 to 7, off-roll in 50 to 75 will actually lead to a cost of 200 because of overheads if you take him on-roll. So I am not saying that you don't take employees on-roll. That is very, very critical. Your important or most the most important parts like sales, service, these areas you can have a lot of on-roll employees which will help you achieve the numbers that you're looking at. But there are certain processes or work streams wherein you can have off-roll employees. So it is very important to have an optimal mix of both of them. And even from a manpower efficiency perspective, today what we've seen is most of the dealerships have defined targets for sales, or number of services done at a particular bay in a day, so on and so forth. But they do not have any other kind of manpower efficiency metrics from an overall manpower perspective. So do you have kind of a manpower efficiency metrics for a receptionist? Possibly not. For a security guard? Possibly not. For someone who's looking at managing the cleanliness of the leadership? Possibly not. So what is very, very important is efficiency has to be measured in all these parameters. And if that is done, that will also help you to save some cost, because at every given point of time, there will be a sense that there is some level of monitoring that is happening. And because of which this will help you curb your expenses. I think that's it from my side. Thank you very much. If there are any questions, we'll be happy to answer.
Usually in a dealership we have stock of parts and the vehicles.
Right, sir.
Whereas, like particularly in parts, we have so much of dead stock. So the data which we have analyzed regarding the profitability, so our dealers are considering the dead stock, or it is a part of their stock only, because even in case of the vehicle, there are so many vehicles which are slow moving or not being sold since long, and particularly in parts, huge amount of stock is there, which is a dead stock.
Sir, this is the data from MCA, so I'm sure all that has got kind of considered in this, because in your books that will get reflected. If it is there in your inventory, finished goods inventory, but it is not got sold, that is something which will be sitting in your balance sheet.
But usually, when we prepare a stock statement, or even we have a DMS or any software on which we work, so it shows the total inventory only.
Right.
So even the
this is included in that, is what you're saying, right? Yeah, that's what. In this numbers, that is something which will get included.
So there is very big hidden cost.
Yes, there is a very big, and that is the reason. If you see, when I showed the slide on profitability, the profitability numbers were not very good. They were in the range of 3 to 4%. Of course, many of you who have your own showrooms, or who have your own land, or your own kind of premises, they will earn relatively higher. See, there was a time when, if I analyze this about a decade ago, there were times where dealerships were making on paper about 5 to 6% EBITDA margins easily. Now those are half as compared to what it was earlier. It's come in the range of about 3 to 3.5%.